When I had tried ignoring it 3 nights in a row and found it as persistent as ever, I set about to deal with it. This time I was prepared. New York, in the first place, was clearly not my cup of tea. I just did not like the place and I was manifestly unsuited for life there. I revealed my ignorance at every turn, and the very name New York was for me now a symbol of embarrassment. It would be wrong from every point of view to leave Gwen and the children again so soon. I was not going to drive 8 hours there and 8 hours back for the privilege of making a fool of myself again. As for going back to the congregation with a new request for money, it was out of the question. These farmers and mine workers were already giving more than they should. How would I explain it to them when I myself did not begin to understand this fresh order to return to the scene of my defeat? I had no better chance than before to see those boys. Less, because now I was typed in the eyes of city officials as a lunatic. Wild horses couldn't drag me to my church with such a suggestion. And yet, so persistent was this new idea that on Wednesday night I stood in the pulpit and asked my parishioners for more money to get me back to New York. The response of my people was truly amazing. One by one, they again got up on their feet, marched down the aisle, and placed an offering on the communion table. This time there were many more people in the church, perhaps 150. But the interesting thing is that the offering was almost exactly the same. When the dimes and quarters and the very occasional bills were all counted, there was just enough to get to New York again. $70 had been collected. The next morning, Miles and I were on our way by 6. We took the same route, stopped at the same gas station, took the bridge into New York. Crossing the bridge, I prayed, Lord, I don't have the least idea why you let things happen as they did last week, or why I'm coming back into this mess. I do not ask to be shown your purpose, only that you direct my steps. Once again, we found Broadway and turned south along this only route we knew. We were driving slowly along when suddenly I had the most incredible feeling that I should get out of the car. I'm going to find a place to park, I said to Miles. I want to walk around for a while. We found an empty meter. I'll be back in a while, Miles. I don't even know what it is I'm looking for. I left Miles sitting in the car and started walking down the street. I hadn't gone half a block before I heard a voice. Hey, Davy. I didn't turn around at first, thinking some boy was calling a friend. But the summons came again. Hey, Davy, preacher. This time I did turn around. A group of 6 teenage boys were leaning against the side of a building beneath a sign saying, No loitering. Police take notice. They were dressed in tapered trousers and zippered jackets. All but one of them were smoking and all of them were bored. A seventh boy had separated himself from the group and walked after me. I liked his smile as he spoke. Aren't you the preacher they kicked out of the Michael Farmer trial? Yes, how did you know? Your picture was all over the place. Your face is kind of easy to remember. Well, thank you. It's no compliment. You know my name, but I don't know yours. I'm Tommy. I'm the president of the rebels. I asked Tommy, president of the rebels, if those were his friends leaning against the no loitering sign, and he offered to introduce me. They kept their studiously bored expressions until Tommy revealed that I had a run-in with the police. There was magic with these boys. It was my carte blanche with them. Tommy introduced me with great pride. Hey fellows, he said, here's the preacher who was kicked out of the farmer trial. One by one, the boys unglued themselves from the side of the building and came up to inspect me. Only one boy did not budge. He flicked open a knife and began to carve an unprintable word in the metal frame of the no loitering sign. While the rest of us talked, 2 or 3 girls joined us. Tommy asked me about the trial, and I told him I was interested in helping teenagers, especially those in the gangs. The boys all but the carver listened attentively, and several of them mentioned that I was one of us. What do you mean I am one of you? I asked. Their logic was simple. The cops didn't like me, the cops didn't like them. We were in the same boat, and I was one of them. This was the first time, but by no means the last time, that I heard this logic. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of myself being hauled up that courtroom aisle, and it had a different light on it. I felt the little shiver I always experience in the presence of God's perfect planning. I didn't have time to think more about it just then, because the boy with the knife at last stepped up to me. His words, although they were phrased in the language of a lonesome boy on the streets, caught my heart more surely than his knife would have been able to do. "Davy," the boy said. He hiked his shoulders up to settle his jacket more firmly on his back. When he did, I noticed that the other boys moved back a fraction of a step. Very deliberately, this boy closed and then opened his knife again. He held it out and casually ran the blade down the buttons of my coat, flicking them one by one. Until he had finished this little ritual, he did not speak again. "Davy," he said at last, looking me in the eye for the first time. "You're all right, but Davy, if you ever turn on boys in this town—" I felt the knife point press my belly lightly. "What's your name, young man?" His name was Willie, but it was another boy who told me. "Willie, I don't know why God brought me to this town, but let me tell you one thing. He's on your side, that I can promise you." Willie's eyes hadn't left mine, but gradually I felt the pressure of the knife point lessen. And then his eyes broke away. He turned aside. Tommy adroitly turned the subject. "Davy, if you want to meet the gangs, why don't you start right here? These guys are all rebels, and I can show you some GGIs too." GGIs, Grand Gangsters Incorporated. I hadn't been in New York half an hour, and already I was being introduced to my second street gang. Tommy gave me street directions, but I couldn't follow them. "Boy, you're a rube, aren't you?" "Nancy," he called one of the girls standing nearby. "Take the preacher down to the GGIs, will you?" The GGIs met in the basement on 134th Street. To reach their clubroom, Nancy and I walked down a flight of cement stairs, weaving our way past garbage pails that were chained to a building, past thin cats with stiff, filthy fur, past a pile of vodka bottles, until finally Nancy stopped and rapped, "Too quick, very slow," on the door. A girl opened it. I thought at first that she was playing a joke. She was the perfect, clinched stereotype of a tramp. She had no shoes on, she held a can of beer, a cigarette hung sideways from her lips, her hair was unkempt, and the shoulder of her dress was pulled on in a deliberately revealing way. Two things kept me from laughing. This girl's face showed no signs of amusement, and she was a child, a little girl in her teens. "Maria," said Nancy, "can you come in? I want you to meet a friend." Maria shrugged one shoulder, the one holding her dress up, and opened the door wider. The room inside was dark, and it took me a while to realize that it was filled with couples, boys and girls of high school age, sat together in this cold and ill-smelling room, and I realized with a jolt, Tommy was right. I was a rogue. That Maria had probably not taken off her own shoes, nor pulled down her own dress. Someone switched on a wan overhead light bulb. The keys slowly untangled themselves and looked up with the same bored eyes I'd seen in the faces of the rebels. "This is the preacher that was kicked out of the farmer trial," said Nancy.